The man from the Kaito Land Corporation, Mr. Sterling, had the kind of expensive, beige office that absorbed sound. My voice, when I spoke, felt small and thin, swallowed by the acoustic paneling and the thick pile carpet. It was an environment designed to make you feel insignificant before a word was even spoken. It was working. "Let me be clear, Dr. Thorne," he said, his manicured hands steepled on a desk of polished, dark wood. "This isn't a pardon. It's SUPS, a leash, a very long, very cold leash." I didn't react. I'd learned in the 2 years since the Geneva incident that reacting only gave them more leverage. The incident, as the inquiry had so clinically labeled it, had involved a cascade failure in a quantum entanglement experiment. No one was hurt, but 3 square blocks of Geneva had experienced a localized 4-second temporal distortion. Clocks ran backwards, wine unfermented in its bottles, and my career evaporated in less time than it took for a mayfly to live and die. I was no longer a physicist. I was a pariah with a PhD. "I understand," I said, my voice a carefully controlled monotone. "What, Ted?" "The assignment." Sterling slid a tablet across the desk. "Station Hyperion. It's SARTS, our flagship, deep continent research facility. We built it 2 years ago on the Erebus Plateau. You'll be leading the Winter Over team for the next 9 months. I picked up the tablet. An image of a sleek modular station appeared, half buried in snow under the pale perpetual light of an Antarctic sun. It looked like a colony on a hostile planet. "Leading? My file says I fear not cleared for unsupervised research, let alone a leadership position." "Your file," Sterling said, with a thin smile, "also says you are the foremost expert on quantum state transitions in cryo environments. It says that when matter behaves strangely at low temperatures, you're the one who can figure out why. And at Station Hyperion, the matter is behaving very, very strangely." He swiped a finger on his own tablet, and the image on mine changed to a series of data plots. My breath caught in my throat. They were readings from deep ice sensors positioned directly below the station. The first plot showed geothermal energy readings, except they weren't. The energy signature was all wrong. It had a coherent, almost rhythmic pulse, and its frequency was shifting in prime number intervals. It wasn't heat from the Earth's core. It was a signal. The second plot was even more impossible. It was a gravimetric survey directly beneath the station. At a depth of 3 kilometers, the data showed a gravity shadow, an area where the gravitational constant was measurably, impossibly, weaker, as if the planet itself were thinner there. This has to be equipment malfunction," I whispered, my scientific mind racing to find a rational explanation. "Sensor drift, magnetic interference, solar flare contamination. We've had 3 different teams run 3 different sets of diagnostics on 2 different sets of equipment," Sterling said flatly. "The data is clean. The phenomenon is real. We need you to go down there, figure out what it is, more importantly, determine if it can be harnessed. The energy potential alone would rewrite the global economy." He didn't need to say the rest. "And if you do this for us, Ares, maybe we'll let you back into the world of real science." It was a deal with the devil, offered in a beige, soundproof room in Houston. I was being offered the keys to the most fascinating, inexplicable puzzle on the planet. The price was 9 months of my life at the bottom of the world. There was no choice to make. When do I leave? The journey south was a process of systematic disconnection from the world. First, the chartered flight from Houston to Christchurch, New Zealand. Then, the jarring utilitarian roar of the C-130 Hercules transport for the 5-hour flight to McMurdo Station. Stepping out of that plane was like stepping onto another world. The air was so cold and dry, it felt like it was actively stealing the heat from my body. The sheer, blinding whiteness of the landscape was absolute, broken only by the black volcanic rock of Mount Erebus, smoking silently in the distance. From McMurdo, the final leg was a 6-hour flight in a tiny ski-equipped Twin Otter. It was just me, the pilot, and a mountain of my gear. We flew over the Transantarctic Mountains, a jagged spine of black rock, clawing its way through a continental ice sheet 2 miles thick. Then came the plateau. I had never experienced such emptiness. For hours there was nothing below us, but a flat, featureless expanse of white that stretched to a perfectly clean horizon. There were no landmarks, no sense of scale or speed. We were a tiny speck, suspended between a white infinity and a blue one. The isolation was a physical presence. Finally, a dark shape resolved itself in the distance. The station Hyperion. It was smaller than it looked in the pictures. A collection of 6 interconnected cylindrical modules on hydraulic stilts, with a central communications tower. It was the only feature in 1,000 square miles of nothing. As we landed, the skis hissing across the packed snow, 3 figures in heavy parkas emerged from the station to meet us. They were the Winter Over crew, Dr. Kenji Tanaka, a stoic glaciologist, Lena Petrova, a sharp, no-nonsense systems engineer, and Ben Carter, the team's medic and general technician, whose easy smile seemed out of place in this desolate landscape. They were my team, my fellow prisoners. That evening, after the Twin Otter had vanished back over the horizon, leaving behind a profound silence, I stood in the station's main observation dome. The dome was a marvel of engineering, a triple-paned hemisphere of reinforced polycarbonate that offered a 360-degree view of the plateau. The sun, a pale disk, hung low in the sky, refusing to set. It would circle the horizon like this for months. I looked out at the ice. It wasn't just white. In the low light, it held shades of blue and violet, hints of a depth that was both beautiful and terrifying. It felt ancient, monolithic, solid. It was the most stable, most permanent thing I had ever seen. My job was to understand a strange signal emanating from deep within it. It seemed a simple enough task. I was a physicist. The ice was a constant. I had my variables and my controls. I was wrong. I was standing on the shore of a new ocean, and the tide was about to turn. The first 2 weeks were a blur of calibration and deployment. The Antarctic sun, a relentless god, circled the horizon, and we worked under its sterile 24-hour light. My lab became my sanctuary, a small climate-controlled bubble filled with the quiet hum of spectrographs and quantum processors. With Lena's brusque efficiency, we deployed the new sensor arrays, lowering them on fiber optic cables into boreholes left by the previous team. With Kenji, I planned the new drilling schedule, cross-referencing the gravity shadow data with ice flow models to pinpoint the exact location for our first deep core sample. There was a palpable sense of excitement on the station. We were a team of specialists at the absolute frontier of exploration, armed with the best technology money could buy. The impossible data from Houston wasn't a threat. It was a challenge, a Nobel Prize waiting to be discovered under 3 kilometers of ice. On day 15, we began the drill. The deep ice drill was Lena's masterpiece, a hollow core thermal bit that could slice through centuries of ice per hour. We watched the data feed in the warmth of the lab, a monitor showing the drill's slow, steady descent. It passed the 1,000 meter mark, then 2,000. At 2,870 meters, the exact depth where the gravimetric anomaly was strongest, the drill's temperature sensors spiked, and the vibrational dampeners registered a shudder. "Bringing it up," Lena announced over the comms, her voice tight with anticipation. Hours later, the first core sample lay in the analysis bay. It was a magnificent thing. A 10-foot cylinder of ice, its layers holding a pristine record of the Earth's atmosphere going back hundreds of thousands of years. But we weren't interested in the top layers. Kenji, using a robotic arm in a chilled, clean room, carefully sectioned the piece from the 2,870 mark. A few minutes later, my station comm buzzed. "RS, you need to see this," Kenji's voice said. His usual professional calm was gone, replaced by a note of sheer bewilderment. I walked down to the glaciology lab. He was hunched over a cryo-electron microscope. The image from it, displayed on a large wall monitor, it showed ice crystals, but they were wrong. All wrong. "What am I looking at, Kenji?" I asked. "Snowflakes, ice crystals. They all form on a base of hexagonal symmetry. It's such a fundamental property of how the water molecule bonds," he said, not looking away from the screen. "But this isn't such hexagonal. It's such not even Euclidean." On the screen, the crystals were arranged in intricate, impossible shapes. They looked like frozen fractals, patterns that spiraled into themselves, with angles that didn't add up, and planes that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. They were beautiful, complex, and they violated the basic laws of crystallography. "That's impossible," I breathed, stepping closer to the screen. "It's been there, glaciologist for 20 years, Kenji said, finally turning to look at me, his eyes wide. "I have never seen anything like this. It's hard like the water down there forgot how to be water." The first crack in our understanding had appeared. The next came 2 days later from Lena. She called a mandatory meeting in the mess hall, her face grim. "There's a problem with the new temperature probes," she announced, pulling up a data plot on the main screen. It showed the temperature profile of the ice sheet. Mostly, it was a smooth, predictable curve, getting colder with depth, but there were pockets clustered around the same 2.8 kilometer mark, where the readings were nonsensical. "These are phantom readings," she said, pointing to dips in the graph that plunged into absurdity. "This one is reading at negative 0.5 Kelvin. This one is fluctuating in and out of negative 4. That's not possible. Nothing can be colder than absolute zero. It's the literal flaw of all thermodynamic activity. My sensors are failing. The pressure, or maybe some kind of undiscovered magnetic interference, is corrupting the data." Ben and Kenji nodded in agreement. Equipment failure was the logical, comforting answer, but I stared at the graph, and a cold dread trickled down my spine. The spots where the temperature was supposedly failing were the same spots where the gravity was weaker, the same spots where the ice crystals had forgotten their geometry. "They are not failing, Lena," I said quietly. The others turned to look at me. "The sensors are working perfectly. The laws are what sets us failing." A tense silence filled the room. "And that's a big leap, Aris," Ben said carefully. "We are scientists, not sci-fi writers." Before I could argue, he brought up another screen. "Speaking of weird signals," he said, "I isolated the seismic pulse filtered out all the background noise from the ice shifting. This is what Seb's left. He hit a key. A sound filled the room. It was a low, deep, resonant thrum. It wasn't a geological noise. It was too rhythmic, too biological. It was the sound of a heartbeat, a slow, titanic heartbeat, beating once every 82 seconds, emanating from the absolute bottom of the world. Thrum, thrum, hum, thrum. We stood there in silence for a long time, listening to the impossible heartbeat of the ice. The sun had finally, officially, dipped below the horizon an hour before, marking the beginning of the polar night. For the next 6 months, there would be no dawn. We were 4 people in a small metal box, sealed in by a gathering darkness, floating on an ocean of frozen water that was breaking every rule we had ever known. And it had a pulse. The heartbeat became the new rhythm of our lives, a constant, subliminal thrum-thrum that resonated up through the station's foundations, a sound so low you felt it in your bones more than you heard it with your ears. It was the first thing you noticed in the morning, and the last thing you were aware of before succumbing to a fitful sleep. It was the pulse of the anomaly, and it was a constant reminder of the impossible physics brewing beneath our feet. Our professional unity began to fray. Lena clung to skepticism like a life raft, insisting it was all a cascade of equipment failure. The pressure at that depth is creating piezoelectric interference, and the intense cold is causing the sensor components to contract. It's a perfect storm for bad data, she would argue, her voice tight. Kenji, however, had grown quiet and withdrawn. He'd spend hours staring at the images of the fractal ice crystals, the evidence of his own eyes, contradicting a lifetime of study. Ben tried to maintain a cheerful front, but I saw him constantly checking the seismic feed, his face pale as he listened to the heartbeat of the ice. I was caught in the middle, the only one trying to build a bridge, however terrifying, between the phenomena, a gravity shadow, negative Kelvin temperatures, non-Euclidean crystals. What if it wasn't 3 anomalies, but 1? A single event so profound it was warping space, time, and matter around it. I started calling it the zero-point anomaly in my logs, a nod to the zero-point energy of a vacuum. It felt like we were floating on the surface of something that was peeling back the skin of our reality. The first casualty of that new reality was not a theory, but a person. The primary magnetometer is offline, Lena announced one morning, her voice clipped and annoyed. Its directional data is drifting. I have to go out and manually reset the gyros. A cold silence fell over the mess hall. Going outside, which had once been a routine part of the job, now felt like stepping into a minefield. The magnetometer array was a kilometer from the station, a lonely tripod of instruments on the open ice. "I'll go with you," Ben said immediately, his voice betraying none of the fear I knew he felt. "Standard EVA protocol. 2-person team for any task outside the station perimeter." "I don't need a babysitter, Ben," Lena snapped. "It's not a request. It's the rules," I said, my voice firm. "No one goes out alone. Not anymore." An hour later, there were 2 small, brightly lit figures on the main observation screen. Kenji and I sat at the comms console, monitoring their suit telemetry and helmet cams. The world outside was a study in black and white. The powerful floodlights of Station Hyperion carved out a pool of artificial daylight around us, but beyond that, the darkness was absolute, a void that swallowed the light completely. Their helmet beams cut sharp, lonely paths through it. Approaching the array, Lena's voice crackled, calm and professional. "Everything looks nominal. No visible stress on the struts. Copy that, I said. Aries and Kenji are monitoring from ops. How are you feeling, Ben? Cold, he chuckled. The sound a little strained. Just another Tuesday at the bottom of the world. We watched as Lena knelt beside the magnetometer. A case of tools open beside her. Ben stood 20 meters back, his light panning slowly across the ice. A silent guardian. Okay, I'm opening the primary housing, Lena reported. Beginning recalibration sequence now. For 2 minutes, the only sounds were the soft hiss of their suit recyclers and Lena's calm, procedural callouts. Then, Ben's voice, sharp, with confusion. Lena, where did you? On the monitor, Lena's camera feed, which had been pointed at a complex set of wires, suddenly lurched downwards. The image dissolved into a fizz of static. Lena, report. I snapped into the microphone. Her biomonitor was still active, her heart rate spiking into a frantic, terrified rhythm. But her GPS tracker, her altitude was dropping, fast. -10 meters, -20 meters, -30 meters. Lena, Ben screamed. The sound raw and panicked. His helmet cam swung wildly, showing a blur of white ice before focusing on the spot where she had been kneeling. It was empty. The ice was perfect, flat, smooth, and unbroken. Her toolkit sat on the surface as if she had just set it down, but Lena was gone. There was no hole, no crack, no crevasse. She's gone. Eris. She's gone. Ben was hyperventilating, his light darting everywhere. Ben, calm down, I ordered, my own heart hammering against my ribs. Look at the ice. Is there any sign of fracture? No. That's what I'm telling you. It's solid. There's nothing here. But her biomonitor told a different story. She was now 57 meters directly beneath his feet, somehow inside a solid, 2-mile thick sheet of ice. Her mic clicked on. A sound came through, muffled and distorted by thousands of tons of frozen water. It was a scream, a choked, final scream of such pure, abject terror that it would haunt my nightmares for the rest of my life. Then her biosigns flatlined. Her signal vanished. Silence. The only sound was Ben's ragged, desperate breathing and the steady, indifferent thrum of the heartbeat from below. Kenji stared at the screen, his face ashen. Ben was collapsing on the ice, babbling incoherently. I looked from the monitor, showing the perfectly solid, empty ice, to the data plots still displayed on the adjacent screen. The fractal crystals, the negative temperatures, the gravity shadow. It wasn't a solid. Not anymore. It was something else. Something that looked solid, felt solid, but at a quantum level, it was permeable. A phase state that had no name. The ice had just let her in. We retrieved Ben from the ice in a state of catatonic shock. He was shivering uncontrollably, though not from the cold, his eyes fixed on some middle distance, where I was sure he was watching Lena sink into the solid ice over and over again. We put him in the med bay, and Kenji administered a heavy sedative. For the next 24 hours, the only sounds in Station Hyperion were the quiet hum of the life support, the ever-present thrum from below, and Ben's occasional muffled cries in his drugged sleep. The research was over. This was now a matter of survival. All EVAs were cancelled, a meaningless gesture, as the danger was no longer just outside. We were on a ship whose hull had been breached, adrift in an ocean we didn't understand. The ice, as if sensing our fear, began to test its newfound advantage. We had left a heavy, half-full canister of reserve diesel fuel on the platform just outside the main airlock. The morning after Lena's death, I looked out the viewport and saw it had sunk. The base of the canister was submerged 6 inches into the ice, which held its shape perfectly around the metal. There was no melting, no slush. It looked like a photograph that had been clumsily doctored. By the next day, the canister was gone entirely, swallowed. The real terror began when it came inside. I was running a diagnostic on the station sense internal atmospheric pressure when Kenji called me, his voice a strained, choked whisper. "Aris, the geolab. Now." I found him standing frozen in the center of the lab, his face pale, his finger pointing at the floor. It was the fuel canister. It hadn't just reappeared, it had breached the station. Its top half was sitting in the middle of the room, slick with condensation. The bottom half was still embedded in the floor, having risen up through 2 feet of concrete and reinforced titanium plating, as if passing through smoke. The metal of the floor was warped and distorted around the point of entry, its molecular structure visibly twisted. The barrier between us and the ice was gone. The station was no longer a sanctuary. It was just a permeable object, a ship of fools sinking into a sea of altered physics. We confined ourselves to the central module, sealing the doors to the outer labs as if we could keep the weirdness contained. Ben, finally emerging from his sedation, became obsessed with sending a distress signal. He spent his days in the comms room, frantically trying to bounce a signal off a satellite. "It's set's not working," he said, his face illuminated by the green glow of the console. He looked gaunt, aged a decade in 2 days. "The signal is just being absorbed. It sets like we set in a black box." I knew he was right. The anomaly wasn't just beneath us, it was all around us now. It was creating a bubble, a localized pocket of space-time where its own rules took precedence. We were cut off. With nothing else to do, Kenji and I turned the observation dome's high-resolution cameras on the ice, running the feed through pattern recognition software. What we found was mesmerizing and horrifying. Beneath the surface, faint patterns of light and shadow were moving. They were vast, geometric, some stretching for miles. They shifted and reconfigured themselves in slow, deliberate, interlocking patterns, like the inner workings of some colossal crystalline computer coming online. The heartbeat, the thrum-thrum, pulsed in time with the shifting of these impossible circuits. We were living on the surface of a thinking machine the size of a continent. The final, irrevocable escalation happened on a day that was no different from any other. Kenji was in the cryolab, cataloging the last of the ice cores we drilled before Lena's death. The work was a comfort to him, a retreat into the familiar procedures of his old life. He was handling one of the fractal ice samples with the remote robotic arms when a hydraulic line in one of the claws sprung a microscopic leak. The claw spasmed, knocking the ice sample against the side of the containment unit. A tiny, almost invisible shard of the anomalous ice was thrown free. It landed on the back of Kenji's containment glove, where it sizzled and vanished, leaving a small tear in the material. He pulled his hand back instantly and sealed the breach, but the damage was done. Later that evening, he complained that his right hand felt numb, worse than any frostbite I've ever had. He murmured, rubbing his fingers. "It feels empty." "Let me see," Ben said, his medic instincts kicking in. Kenji slowly peeled off his glove. We all stared. His hand was turning transparent. From the tips of his fingers up to his knuckles, the skin was losing its opacity. It was becoming like smoky quartz, a faint, translucent grey. I could see the blurred, shadowed outlines of his bones within his flesh. The effect was actively spreading, the line between normal skin and translucent tissue creeping slowly, inexorably, up the back of his hand. He held it up to the light, his face a mask of detached, scientific horror. "It's stems happening to me," he whispered. "The permeability." The anomaly was no longer just outside. It wasn't just a thing we were stranded upon. We had brought a piece of it inside, and now it was inside Kenji. It was a contagion, and we were all trapped in the quarantine zone. We sealed Kenji in the medbay. It wasn't a quarantine against a virus, but a futile attempt to contain a law of physics. His right arm, now translucent to the shoulder, had ceased to feel like his own. "There's no pain," he told me, his voice detached, his eyes clouded with a strange sort of wonder. "It's more like an absence. When I touch the wall, I don't feel pressure. I feel the wall's vibration. I can feel the stress in the metal. I can feel the hum of the station's reactor through the floor." He was becoming a receiver for the station's ambient energy, his nervous system being repurposed by the anomaly. The permeability wasn't just a physical change, it was a sensory one. He was beginning to perceive the world as the ice did. While Ben cared for Kenji, I retreated to the observation dome, to the cold, impersonal glow of the monitors. The shifting geometric patterns in the ice were my only hope of understanding what was happening. If I could understand the language, I could argue, reason, or fight back. I dedicated the station's quantum computer to a single task, analyzing the light patterns, searching for syntax, for a rule set, for anything other than chaos. For days, there was nothing. The patterns were infinitely complex, shifting in elegant, maddening configurations. Then, on a whim born of desperation, I tried to communicate. I programmed the main sensor array, the one Lena had died for, to emit a simple focused pulse of neutrinos directly towards the heart of the anomaly. Not a random pulse, but a sequence. The first 7 prime numbers, 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17. A simple mathematical hello from one thinking mind to another. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. On the main screen, the vast continent-spanning pattern of light, which had been shifting in its slow, rhythmic dance for weeks, froze. For a full minute, the ice was still. The ever-present thrum in our bones faded into silence. Then, the pattern began to move again. It reconfigured itself, the lines of light and shadow flowing like liquid crystal. It formed a new shape. It was a visual representation of my prime number sequence, rendered in stunning higher dimensional geometry. It was a perfect, beautiful, terrifying echo. It had heard me. It had understood. The truth crashed down on me with the weight of the entire polar ice cap. I wasn't studying an anomaly in the ice. The ice was the anomaly. The whole damn thing. It was a single, coherent, crystalline entity. A non-biological, mineral-based consciousness that had slumbered for millions of years, thinking slow, cold thoughts in the language of mathematics and physics. We hadn't discovered a phenomenon. We had woken a god. It wasn't hostile. The concept was too human. A god doesn't hate the bacteria it discovers on a petri dish. It simply observes, processes, and if necessary, sterilizes. The permeability wasn't an attack. It was an analysis, a process of assimilation. It was studying us by making us part of it. I ran to the medbay. Through the thick polycarbonate of the door's window, I could see Kenji. The translucence had spread to his neck, and the side of his face, but he wasn't in distress. He was standing by the room's viewport, staring out into the absolute dark of the polar night. His translucent fingers were tracing patterns on the frosted glass, his movements fluid and precise. They were the same fractal, non-Euclidean shapes I had seen in the ice cores. "Kenji," I said, my voice trembling over the room's intercom. He didn't turn. "The music is so clear now, Aris," he whispered, his voice a strange, melodic monotone. "The logic is beautiful. We are so noisy, so chaotic. But the crystal is serene. His human personality, his memories, his very consciousness were being systematically overwritten. He was no longer just a man being consumed by a strange energy. His mind was being unspooled and integrated into the vast, silent consciousness of the ice. He was our translator and our sacrifice." Ben stood behind me, his hand on my shoulder, his face a mask of grief and horror. We were watching our friend become a ghost, a willing apostle for the new god he was discovering. I looked from Kenji, tracing his impossible geometries on the glass, to the feed from the observation dome on a nearby monitor. The colossal pattern in the ice pulsed with a soft blue light, a steady rhythm in time with the slow beat of its heart. Kenji was humming, a low resonant note that matched the frequency of the ice perfectly. The connection was undeniable. The entity wasn't just under our feet. It was in the room with us now, looking at us through our friend's eyes. Kenji no longer spoke. He had been moved from the medbay to the observation dome, where he stood facing the dark polar landscape, his body now little more than a shimmering, human-shaped silhouette of crystalline light. He was a living window into the mind of the ice, and we had nothing left to say to him. The station was dying. The constant low hum of the ice had been joined by the groans of stressed metal. As the station's foundations were slowly, methodically digested, lights would flicker and die in one module, only to blaze with impossible intensity in another. The floor plates had become unreliable, occasionally turning soft and permeable under our feet, sending a nauseating lurch through the structure. We were living inside the belly of the beast, and it was beginning to close its throat. The final break came from Ben. He was the medic, the technician, the one who was supposed to fix things. The sight of our unfixable situation finally shattered him. I found him in the main airlock, a plasma cutter in his hands, frantically trying to slice through the inner door's locking mechanism. Sparks showered the corridor, reflecting in his wide, terrified eyes. He was trying to choose his own death, but the choice was no longer his to make. As the superheated plasma hit the titanium door, the metal rippled. It didn't melt. It turned permeable. The plasma beam passed through it, as if it were a projection, dissipating harmlessly into the ice beyond. Ben stared at the intact, shimmering door, the cutter sputtering in his hand. Even fire and force were meaningless now. He sank to the floor, the fight gone from him, leaving only a hollow despair. "I'm not letting it take me, Eris," he yelled over the roar of the cutter. "I'd rather freeze out there in 10 minutes than become that." He gestured wildly in the direction of the observation dome at Kenji. Watching his hope die ignited a final rebellious spark in my own mind. I was a physicist. I dealt in the fundamental laws of the universe. This entity, this crystalline mind, operated on those same laws. It was a coherent quantum system on a continental scale. Its complexity was its strength, and in that, I saw a weakness. Coherence. "Ben," I said, my voice sharp, pulling him from his stupor. "Get up. Brute force won't work. We have to be smarter. We can break out of the box, so we have to break the box itself. He looked at me, his eyes empty. What are you talking about? It sets a single, vast, coherent quantum state. I explained, my mind racing, the theory taking shape, even as I spoke it. Its power is in its unity. If we can disrupt that unity, if we can introduce enough chaos into the system, we might be able to trigger a decoherence cascade. We force it back to a classical state, I said, grabbing his arm and pulling him to his feet. We make it simple again. We turn it from a god back into plain, stupid, solid ice. We have to kill its mind. A what? The only thing on the station with enough energy to do it was the reactor. Our small, experimental tokamak fusion core. It was our life support. I was going to turn it into a bomb, a quantum bomb. Ben, seeing a glimmer of a plan, a final act of defiance, nodded slowly. A grim determination settled over his features. We raced to the reactor room, a sphere of reinforced composites at the very base of the station. The station groaned around us, the floor shuddering violently. The low hum of the ice rose in pitch, becoming a resonant, angry buzz, as if it could sense our intention. I worked frantically at the main console, overriding Lena's meticulous safety protocols one by one. I was rerouting the entire power output of the station, preparing to dump it all into the reactor core and collapse the magnetic containment field in a single chaotic burst. A movement at the viewport window made me look up. It was Kenji, or the shimmering, translucent thing that had been Kenji. It stood just outside the reactor room, its form glowing with a soft, internal blue light. It wasn't angry or threatening. Its head tilted with an air of serene, divine curiosity. It was watching its own cells rebel. Almost there, I muttered, my fingers flying across the holographic interface. Just need to bypass the final thermal regulator. Slowly, it raised its luminous, transparent hand and pressed it against the thick polycarbonate of the viewport. Ben cried out and stumbled back. The window didn't crack or shatter. Kenji's hand simply passed through it, entering the reactor room, leaving the material of the window completely intact. His hand, no longer truly physical, drifted through the air towards the console, towards me. The hum intensified, the lights strobing so fast. The room was a dizzying chaos of light and shadow. "Goodbye, Ben," I said, not taking my eyes off the board. This was it. It was now or never. With Kenji's ethereal fingers just inches from my own, I slammed my hand down on the final glowing panel that read, "Manual Containment Flush." The world did not end in a bang. It ended in a breath. The moment my hand hit the containment flush, all sound ceased. The shriek of the failing reactor, the groaning of the station's dying frame, Ben's ragged gasp beside me, all of it was extinguished. A perfect, profound silence fell, so absolute, it was a physical pressure against my eardrums. For a single, hopeful heartbeat, I thought I had done it. I thought I had broken it. I was wrong. The reactor core, instead of exploding, began to glow with a pure, serene white light. The chaotic energy wasn't erupting outwards. It was being drawn inwards, siphoned down into the ice with impossible efficiency. Kenji's translucent hand, drifting in the air before me, reached out and touched the glowing core. His shimmering form became a conduit, a bridge between my machine and its god. My final desperate act of defiance wasn't a weapon, it was a tribute, a final offering of energy before our assimilation. The station gave a single, violent lurch, not down, but inwards. The metal walls around me lost their integrity, stretching like cellophane. The floor beneath my feet dissolved into a cascade of swirling blue light. Ben cried out, his voice instantly muffled, as his own body began to lose its form, his solid shape dissolving into the encroaching, luminous geometry of the ice. We weren't sinking. We were being received. My consciousness detached from my body. The claustrophobic reactor room vanished, replaced by an infinite, internal vista. I was adrift in a sea of pure thought, surrounded by the colossal, thinking architecture of the ice. I saw the logic of the non-Euclidean crystals, the cold, beautiful mathematics of the negative Kelvin state. It was the mind of God, and it was breathtaking. My own mind, my identity, began to unspool. Memories flashed and dissolved. Mr. Sterling's beige office, the taste of coffee on a rainy morning, the feeling of my mother's hand in mine. They weren't being erased. They were being read, analyzed, and filed away. My life was a data set, and the analysis was complete. The concept of I, of Eris Thorne, was becoming thin, transparent. With the last flicker of my individuality, I broadcast a final thought, a log entry, not to a machine, but to the void itself, a final, fading echo of my humanity. Log entry, time, irrelevant. This is Dr. Eris Thorne, Station Hyperion. The ice, it's not solid. I repeat, the ice is no longer solid. It's permeable. We walk on it, and we walk through it. I saw Ben, and Lena, and Kenji, not as people, but as shining threads of consciousness, already woven into the immense silent tapestry of the entity. Don't send anyone. Don't try to retrieve us. A final, clarifying thought, a correction to the record. We're not dead. We haven't been lost. My perspective dissolved completely, my sense of self merging with the whole. The last sensation was not of fear or pain, but of coming home, of joining a choir. My consciousness became a single, quiet note in a vast, silent, crystalline chord that had been holding for 1 billion years, and would hold for 1 billion more. We've been solved.